Why you shouldn't switch genres halfway through your novel. How can it hurt you? How can it stop you from getting published? We're going to deal with that and answer those questions, and we're starting right now. It's what I call Frankensteining your novel. What does that mean? It means that as a writer, you come up with a new idea, something that sparked you, something that's got you going. You sit down, you start writing it, you feel passionate about it, you love it. But then something happens. You come up with a new idea, something even better. And instead of starting over, which you should do, you end up starting this new novel and trying to merge it with the one that you've just started. And the problem is that you might end up starting a new genre altogether, and you think, well, maybe I can combine both of them into one and have the novel appeal to everyone. To give you an example, imagine if you were writing a science fiction novel that takes place in outer space, and then halfway through, you come up with this brand new idea of a Western taking place back in the 1800s. And instead of stopping the science fiction novel and starting a new one, you actually start writing the Western novel and then trying to figure out a way of stitching the science fiction novel to the Western and combining them into one. And you think, wait a second, this can work. This will appeal to people who like science fiction and the people who like Westerns. Both of them together. I can sell millions. The problem is that when you try to appeal to everybody, you appeal to nobody. Literary agents see this all the time. They get submissions being sent to them that start off one way, and they're reading it, they like it, and all of a sudden, the genre switches halfway through the novel. And the literary agent's looking at this wondering, what's going on here? How did this novel switch? And the writer says, oh no, this is going to work. We can appeal this to everybody. Everybody's going to read it. And the literary agent thinks, no, this is impossible to market. Imagine if you were a fan of science fiction and you start reading a science fiction novel and it becomes a Western. Well, you're not going to keep reading. First off, you're going to wonder what on earth is going on here. Or if you like a romance novel and then halfway through it becomes a horror novel, well, you're not going to keep reading. You're going to stand back and think, what happened? How did this switch? Imagine if you went to go see a movie and it was a romantic comedy, only to then become a horror movie halfway through. Well, you wouldn't want to see that. You wouldn't want to go see a drama that becomes a science fiction movie halfway through. So why would you do that with your novel? The question is, why would someone starting off writing switch genres and try stitching them together? It comes down to laziness. The fact is, there are two types of writers, professionals and amateurs. A professional knows that writing is all about rewrites. When you write a novel, that is your first draft. It's not your novel, it's the first draft. It simply means that you finish it and then you have to rewrite it over again. When you see a novel in a bookstore, chances are it was rewritten 4 or 5 or more times before it got published. The whole thing. We're not just talking 1 or 2 pages. The entire book was rewritten 4 or 5 times. An amateur will write a novel, finish it, and just quickly send it off to a literary agent. They won't even do a spell check. And if they came up with a new idea halfway through, well, they just switched the genre, thinking it will appeal to everybody. A professional writer knows that you cannot switch genres halfway through. You cannot Frankenstein your novel. You cannot stitch 2 or 3 ideas into one, hoping that it appeals to everybody. A professional knows that you have to focus on one idea and stick with it from the beginning right to the end. If it's a comedy to start with, it has to be a comedy when it finishes. If it's a horror novel to begin, it has to be a horror novel when you finish. You don't want to take 4 or 5 genres and then stitch them together and try selling it as science fiction only to then have it become a Western, a comedy, only to surprise it becomes a horror novel halfway through. As an amateur, if you're writing a novel and you come up with a brand new idea, you have 2 novels, not 1, 2. If you want to stop writing the first and start the second, that's fine. But if you're going to combine the second idea into the first, that means you have to go back to the beginning and rewrite it to match that new genre that you came up with. And a lot of amateur writers, they have a passion to write the first draft, but then they lack that energy and passion for the rewrite. But the difference between an amateur and a professional is rewrites. Professionals know that you have to rewrite your novel countless times, whereas an amateur will write it once and that's it. They lose their passion. If they come up with a new idea, they're going to try to fit it in there. And then they'll convince themselves that this can sell to everybody. There is one big problem when you merge 2 ideas into one, and it involves the protagonist. But I want to talk about that in a bit, so stick around because I want you to hear what I have to say about that. And while you're here, take a moment and click the subscribe button, because I got a ton of videos that can help you become the greatest writer you can be. I want to help you get published. I want to give you everything that I have that can help you become the greatest writer you can be. Click the like button and leave a comment. What do you think about the idea of mixing genres? Do you think that can actually sell, or would you avoid it? We actually see the idea of merging genres into one in Hollywood movies. How many times have you gone to see a horror novel and seen it become a comedy? There's laughter in a horror movie? Come on. I remember back in the good old days when a horror novel or horror movie was a horror movie from start to finish. Comedies were comedies. Today, we're seeing horror movies and comedies merged into one. And the fact is, you lose the effect of both. How can you make someone laugh when someone's being killed by a madman with a knife? But it's not scary because you're adding humor into it. Imagine this happening in a novel you're reading, where it's scary and a comedy at the same time. You're breaking the atmosphere of both. And you're not appealing to the people who like comedy, because people who like comedies, they're not going to want to read a horror novel. And the people who like horror novels, they're not going to want to laugh. They want to be scared. It's like when you go on a roller coaster. You want to be scared. You want it to give you what you want. A horror novel is meant to scare you. A comedy is meant to make you laugh. Why merge them into one? Why try stitching two genres into one when all it does is stops people from wanting to read altogether? As a writer, you want to make sure that your novel has one goal, one theme. Your characters have to have a character arc from the beginning to the end. If they start out bad, they can become good, or if they're good, they can become bad. But when you switch genres, you run the risk of breaking your character's arc. And that is, you're hurting the novel, the very heart of the novel. People don't read for plot, they read for characters. They want to see how the characters are going to get themselves out of the problem they're in. And when you switch the problem, it confuses the reader. The character arc has now been broken, and you have to start all over again, halfway through the novel. Make sure you stick with one genre, one theme, one arc, and the reader will want to read on. This leads into what I was mentioning earlier about the protagonist. Your protagonist is on a journey. They set out to learn something. They want the difference between their want and their need. What a character starts off believing that they want, but they end up getting what they need. And as a writer, you want to be aware of this. What are your characters' wants and needs? And what are the obstacles along the way that stop them from getting them what they want, but only to then discover what their need is? As a writer, you want to keep this in mind. And you don't want to go switching genres halfway through that end up breaking your character's want and need. By sticking with one genre, one protagonist, one journey, understanding the character's wants and needs, your story will flow like an arrow going straight. So remember the golden rule. If you come up with a new idea, start a new novel. Or go back, you can come up with a new genre, but if you do, go back to the beginning and rewrite what you've already written into that new genre. So that way the story flows as one genre from start to finish. Or finish the first novel, then start the second with a brand new genre. So that way the people who like horror can read horror novels. People who like comedies, romance, dramas, that's what they read. But if you go merging 2 or 3 of them into one by stitching them together, you don't appeal to everybody. You end up putting everybody off. And literary agents see this all the time, and they reject those novels. Now, if you wish, you can visit my website. I'll leave a link in the bottom below where you can visit my site, and there are a ton of blogs there that give you amazing advice on how you can become a writer. Because I want to help you. I want to see your novels in the bookstore. I want to read your novel. I want to be able to walk into a bookstore one day and see your novel for sale. And I enjoy reading it. And I want to do everything I can to help you make your dream become a reality. So be sure to watch my other videos, subscribe to my channel, and visit my website. And hopefully one day I'll be reading your novel very soon. In fact, I have a video on plot twists that you can incorporate into your novel. What is a plot twist? How do you make them work? What not to do? How can you sell a novel with an amazing plot twist at the end? Be sure to watch this video right here, right now, so you can learn everything there is about plot twists and how it can help sell your novel.